Welcome to my full Next.js crash course, and in this video I'm going to be going over the very basic stuff that you're going to need to know to make your first full stack application. And before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe so don't miss upcoming Next.js lessons. Comment down below if you have any questions or if you have anything that you'd like to say. But now, let's get started. Before I go over the setup, I want to go over what Next.js is already, and if you already know what it is, then you can skip to the actual setup, but if not, this is going to be the actual documentation, and let's read this real quick. So Next.js is a React framework, which we already know, so that's really good. So it's pretty much just React with backend, and it's for building full stack web applications. So if you don't know what full stack is, it's pretty much when you combine backend and front end, and if you don't know what those two are, front end is going to be pretty much all the videos that I made so far. So it's going to be your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React, which pretty much combines all of it. But that's going to be your front end. It's going to be what the user sees. And then the back end is going to be the server side. So it's going to be stuff like the database and pretty much just stuff that the user doesn't see. So stuff that happens behind the actual website. So when you combine these two, you get a full stack web application. And so we can see that it says that we can use React components to build user interfaces, and we have our Next.js for additional features and optimizations, which makes it really nice. And we can see that Next.js can help you build interactive, dynamic, and fast React applications. So that's going to be the most important part here, but now that we know the very basics of what Next.js is, let's go over the setup. Now we can go to installation, and if you don't have Node.js, you're going to have to install it, so you can press on Node.js and then install it here. So this is going to be the website. Press on download Node.js. It's going to download and it shouldn't take too long. But once you're done with that, we can go down in here and we can see this automatic installation, which is going to be a lot faster than the manual one. So over here. Now, it's going to be really similar to the way that we install React. So npx create next app instead of create React app, and we always want to write at latest to check if there's a new version, and then we install that if there is. So go to your desktop, right click, press on open in terminal, I'm gonna drag it in here, make it larger, and now let's write this. So npx create next app at latest, and then you're gonna name it. So I'm gonna just name it my next app, and then press on enter. Make sure you also have nothing capitalized or it's not going to work. Now it's going to ask us a few questions. So would you like to use TypeScript? I'm going to say no to that. ESLint, yes. Tailwind CSS, yes. Source directory, I'm going to say no to this, and then I'm going to actually show you what the difference is between having a source directory and not. So I want you to say no. And then app router, make sure that this one is yes. It's very important. So yes. Import alias, that's going to be no, and that's going to start installing. I'm going to actually open another window and do the exact same thing. I'm going to just my next. I'm just going to name it my next, and then here I'm going to show you what the difference is with having a source folder and not having it. So this one is going to have a source directory and then app router and so on. So it's going to start installing this one too. But if I go back here, we can see that this guy is ready. So what we can do now is write cd my next app. You can press tab and it should autocomplete, but if not, then you have to finish it. So my next app, and now we can press on enter, and now we're in this folder. So if we write code dot, it's going to open it in VS Code. So this is what the folder structure is going to look like when we have no source folder. So we can see we have our app, public, node modules, and so on. Now if we go to this PowerShell, and if I cd to that project, so I called it my next and press on enter. Now if we open this guy with code, we can see that we have this source directory with our app inside of it. So I'm just going to put them side by side, and we can see that we have our app here with all of our stuff, but we don't have our source directory, which we do in here. So this is going to be the only difference, and you can choose whichever one you want to, but I'm going to use this guy on the left. So that's going to be without the source directory. So now I'm going to actually go ahead and delete it, or I'm going to do that later. But now let's go over the folder structure. So the app folder is going to be our app router with different files here. So the first file is going to be the page.js, which is going to be a React file that is unique to a route, and you'll see what that means later on. So when we start the server, this is going to be the first file that we see, and we're going to see how we can actually have unique routes and so on. But this is going to be the page.js. Then we have the layout.js, which is going to be a UI that is shared between our routes. So we can see that here we have our root layout with HTML, and then the actual body, and then the children is going to be our page.js files, and we're going to see how this also works later on. Then we have the global.css. Hopefully this is self-explanatory. This is going to be our global CSS file with all of the styles, and currently we can see that we have Tailwind in here, so we can keep that. And then we have the favicon. So this is just going to be the logo of the website. So now let's move on to node modules. So here we're going to have all of our dependencies and modules installed, so this doesn't really matter. Then we're moving on to the public folder, which is where all of our assets are going to be. So we can see there's two SVJ files, which is going to be the next SVJ and then Vercel SVJ. So we can close the public folder. And we have a few other files here. So git ignore is going to be so that when you publish this folder, it's going to ignore all of these files. So you can see that node modules is going to be one of them, which means that when we publish it, it's going to ignore the node modules, because if we publish a repository with the node modules, it's going to be a lot larger. So it's going to take a lot longer to clone it or changes. So it's a lot easier to just ignore it. And then once you clone this, you can go to the console, or you can go to the terminal here and then just run npm I, which is going to install all the dependencies. So we can see that these are going to be all the dependencies, and it's going to take a lot more time if we actually have them added instead of just installing them later on. And then we have a few other files. So we have the tailwind config, our package.json file. So just like I said, this one's going to have all of our dependencies. The package.json is going to have our script. So this is going to be different ways in which we can actually run the server. And then all the other files don't really matter, but we have the readme, which we can actually delete. So let's go ahead and do that. And if we actually go back in here, project structure, we can see that the app and then the public folders that we have are going to be top level folders. So that just means that they're really important. And we have the pages folder, which we don't actually have because we're using app router and not pages router. So we have our app folder. And then public, it's going to be our static assets, and then the source folder, which we don't have because when we initialized our Next.js, we said that we don't want it. So we can see that this is what it would look like with the source folder, and this is what it looks like without it. But now let's actually try and run the server. So I'm going to go to view, terminal, and run npm run dev, which should start our server. So we can see that it's going to start, and we have to go to localhost 3000. So localhost 3000, it's going to take some time because it had to compile some stuff, but we can see that this is going to be the template. We're going to have a few links here, so the docs and other stuff, but I'm not going to go over that because it doesn't really matter. So what we're going to do now is actually remove the app folder because we're going to make a new one from scratch. So we can terminate this batch job by pressing Control C, pressing on Y. Now we're going to go back in here, and when we scroll down, we're going to have to start with our app routing. So we have a few files here. We have our layout, page, and then other stuff, but the most important ones right now is going to be the page and the layout. So we can start with the layout and take a look at that. So like I said before, a layout is a UI that is shared between routes, which means that every time we go on a new page, it's going to share this layout file. So we had our HTML here and then all the other stuff. So let's just go here, go to JavaScript, copy that. Let's make our folder first. So app folder. Then we need our layout.js. Paste everything in here. I'm going to space this out. And if we scroll down, we can see some other stuff, but we can go back to here, take a look at the page.js, and this can be our normal React file. So we can see that they're exporting this function like that. So let's go in here, we write page.js. So instead of writing something like function home and then exporting it like this, so export default home, I have to capitalize that, but instead of doing that, they will export default before the function, which is going to save you maybe 2 lines. So export default home, and then here we can return an h1 that says home to see what that would look like. But now let's actually run this and see what that looks like. So npm run dev, wait for it to start. Now we can go back here and then reload and see what that looks like. So it's going to take some time. And so here's going to be our page.js file. I'm a bit zoomed in, but here's going to be the home. And now let's actually go ahead and add our globals.css. And we got to go to Tailwind to copy this right here. So we can go back in here, paste that. And now we have to actually import it in the layout. So let's go here and write import and then find it. So it's just going to be globals.css. And now if I press on Control, hover it, and actually left click, we can see that it opens it. So that means that the path is correct. So now we can actually also add a title and description to our page. So to do that, we have to use something called metadata. So we also have to export it. So export const metadata. And then here we're just going to write the title. So title, we can write my first next application or something like that. And we can add a description. So description, and then here we're just gonna write hello world. Doesn't matter, you can write whatever you want. But now if we go back in here, we can see it says my first next application, and it's also gonna have a description of whatever we wrote in here. So the default description is generated by create next app, and then I'm just gonna name this next.js. So it's going to be fine. Next.js app, and now the title is changed to that. So there we go. Now I want to go over app routing. So in our app folder, we can make a new folder. So let's just call it user. In here, we're going to make a new file, which is going to be a page.js file, just like this one. I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, and here I'm going to write user. And you'll see how this works in a second. So currently we're going to be in our home page because we have nothing in here. But the way that the app router folder works is every time you make a folder, this is going to be our new path. So we're going to have a path that goes to users, and the page.js is going to be the actual file that we would use. So let's go, not really sure what I did there, but if we go back here and write user, we can see that we're going to go to user now. But if we go to, let's say, users with an S, we're going to get a 404 page not found because this doesn't exist. So if I went over here and changed this to, let's just say, dashboard, and change this to dashboard 2, go back in here, we're going to get a 404 page not found because we don't have a user's page. So if we change this to dashboard, we can see that now we're going to be in the dashboard page. And if we wanted to, we can make another folder in here. So go dashboard, and here we could just say, let's say, user or settings or whatever. And we also have to make our page.javascript file. So I'm just going to copy and paste it here, change this to user. And now since we're in dashboard, we can also go to user. So user, and here's going to be our user. So if we try to go to user without going to dashboard first, this is not going to work. And now since you go into the documentary and see how routing works, so we can see that this is all that I went over. It's actually going to be called a segment. So every folder is going to have a page.js file. That's going to be a segment. So here's going to be the page.js file inside of the app. That's going to be the JavaScript file that opens when you go to the home directory. So there it is. Go back in here, we have our pages and layouts. So this is going to be something pretty important. So we can see our app has a page, and also if we scroll down here, it's going to have a layout, and we can actually also make special layouts. So scroll even more. So the app is going to have a layout, but we can also add a layout to our dashboard, which means that this dashboard, every page file in there is going to have a special layout. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So let's go to our dashboard here. I'm going to go to this layout, paste it in here, and see what that would look like. So that should be inside of the dashboard, and it is. So there's going to be our layout. We can change this to dashboard, and we can see that also change here. So fail to compile, this doesn't work, and that's because of the CSS file in here. So go back in here, here's going to be our home, and here we can see that the title is Next.js. But if we go to dashboard, we can see that now it's going to be dashboard. Now if we also go to user, so user, we're still going to have our title for dashboard because it's going to be using this layout, which means that we can also have special stuff in here. So let's say in the body, the children would be in the main body, so in here, but then we could also have, let's say, a header here with some stuff. So I'm just going to add an H1 just as an example. So here we're going to have our dashboard at user, and then if we go in here, we're going to have dashboard, but here you can actually have, let's say, your nav bar with some links and stuff like that. But this is the very basics of how layouts could work, and you can have them anywhere. So you can also have a special layout for user, but hopefully you get the point. So let's just say that in here we wanted to have an H1, which was dashboard, and then I'm just going to add a few classes here. So text large, see what that looks like. So there it is. Let's actually also go to the body, and let's just say in the dashboard we wanted to have some special classes here. So let's just see background gray. We're going to see that change to gray. We can also set this to be a container, and I'm going to actually move this, and I'm going to do MX auto so that it would be spaced out. So there it is. We can do some other stuff. So let's say the dashboard could be font bold. And then for the actual page inside of our dashboard, here we can have, I don't know, let's just say an H2 with, I don't know, let's just say main or whatever. And then here we have our user, but we can also go in here and let's just say we had an HR or something like that, but hopefully get the point. There's other different stuff you can do with the layout and other stuff, but this is just the very basics, of course. But now I want to go over dynamic routes, so it's going to be right over here. This is going to be something really useful, and we can see an example here. So this is just going to be a route. We have app, blog, and then we have slug inside of square brackets. Now what this is going to allow us to do is we can actually fetch something called params inside of our function. So I'm just going to recreate this too. So blog, and then inside of blog we had square brackets, and then we had slug in there. So slug. And we had our page.js file. So let's just write export default function home. And then in here we can get our parameters. So params, and we can get params. So let's just go back in here. We can see our example URLs and then the route. So the routes are going to be the same, but our URLs are going to be different. So after blog, we can see that our URL is going to be A, and then our slug is going to be A instead of the params. In this case, we're going to have B. The slug is also going to be B. So what we can do with dynamic routes is, let's just say in this case we have blogs, and instead of having to do something like for each blog, we're going to have to create a folder or a route. So let's just say blog1, and then have to write a page.js file, and then also have to do blog2 or something like that. What you can do is just use dynamic routes, which is just going to save you a lot of time. So in this case we have our slug, and if we just write h1, we actually have to return that. So return h1, we have to write params.slug. So if we go back here, we can go to blog, and we're going to get a 404. But if we go to blog A, we're going to see that we're going to have our A here. So just say we have our blog about something. Now if we go back here, blog about A. Now let's just say blog about web dev. Blog about web dev. So this is the way that dynamic routes work, and let's just say that this could have been an ID, and then we use that ID to fetch the blog and then write all of it in here. But this is just a very small example, and this right here doesn't have to be slug. This could actually be an ID, and then we would also have to change that here. So ID, and we can see that if I reload, it's going to work the exact same way. So I'm just going to write dev with, and it's going to work the exact same way. So instead of slug, it's going to be ID. We can even rename this to, let's just say, blog ID, and then this is going to have to be blog ID, and then let's just go to ABC, and we're going to get our ABC returned. So this is going to be the very basics of dynamic routes, and it's going to save you a lot of time when you have to do something similar to having a blog, or you could also do that with users. So if the user is logged in and you search up, let's say you go to users, so users, and then you have some certain string here. If you're logged in, then you're going to see your own user. You're going to be able to edit it. But if it's someone else's user, then you're going to just be able to view it. So that's just a very simple example of how you can use dynamic routes. But now I know dynamic routes, let's go to linking and navigation. And this right here is going to be our link component. So instead of using an href, we're going to be using a link component, because this link component is going to provide us with prefetching, which is going to allow us to preload a route in the background before the user even visits it, which is going to make it a lot faster. So let's actually go back to our VS Code, and I'm going to go to the layout.js, because in here we can make a very simple header with some nice stuff in there. So in here, let's make a nav. So nav, and then in this nav we have our dashboard, and then let's add a link here. So let's write link, and then the href for that is just going to be the users. So let's go to dashboard user, and then let's go to user here and see what that looks like. So let's go back in here. I'm going to go to dashboard, and we're going to have an error here. So link is not defined, which means that we have to actually define it. So we have to import it, which is going to be coming from next link. And now we're not going to have the error anymore. But if you press on the user here, we can see that we're going to be in the user now. So let's make it a bit nicer. Let's actually change this to flex justify between. Now we're going to have our dashboard and then user over there. Let's also add the actual dashboard. So let's actually change this h1 to also be a link. And then the href is just going to be dashboard. And I'm not really sure why I added the curly brackets, but there it is. So if we press on dashboard, we're going to be going back to dashboard. The user is going to be back to user. So that's going to be our link element here, which is going to be a lot nicer than just using an href, because, well, we already know what it does. So Then we have stuff like the middleware, which is going to allow us to run code before a request is completed, which means that we will be able to modify the response by rewriting, redirecting, or modifying the request. And redirecting is going to be the most common one. So if you have users and let's just say they were going to go to the dashboard, which they're not allowed because they're not logged in, then the middleware is going to be there and it's going to check if, let's say, you have a cookie. If you have it, then it's going to allow you to go there. But if not, it's just going to redirect you to the normal page. So if the non-logged in user is going to go to dashboard, it's just going to redirect him to here, so to home or whatever your home page is when the user is not logged in. Then we have other stuff like error handling. So this is the page that's going to open when an error occurs. So let's say in the dashboard you can write error.jsx or JS, and then it's just going to open this code right here. Now we're going to go over fetching, and I accidentally deleted the blog folder with all the stuff and I can't undo it, so I'm going to get an error here. So that's gone, but it's fine. So I'm going to go back in here and we're going to go over data fetching. So in data fetching, it's going to work pretty much the exact same way. Well, not the exact same way, but the folder structure is going to be very similar. We're going to have a folder called API. Here we're going to have another folder, so let's just say user, and then we're going to be using a file called route.js. So instead of page.js, this guy is going to be called route.js. Here we're going to have different HTTP methods that we can use. So we have get, head, post, put, delete, patch, and options, and the most common ones are going to be get and post. So we're just going to go over get. Now I'm going to actually go back in here and we're going to start with the page.js file. So here we're going to start by making a function that's going to fetch the data that we don't have, but we're going to make it later. So let's start here. I'm going to actually just name this function fetch data, and also this has to be an async function, and I'm going to go over all the details later. So function fetch data, and here we're going to start by using a try and catch. So in case there's any errors, we can just catch them and then just console log them. So console log error, close this right here, and now it's actually try to fetch the data. So we're going to write await fetch, so fetch, and the way that it works is we have to write the full URL at the start, so HTTP, and then we're going to use localhost 3000, and this is going to be inside of the folder API and user. So it's going to be API, then user, and this is going to be it, or pretty much it. So we have to do one more thing. We have to also mention the method that we're using. So the method is just going to be a get method. Make sure it's all capitalized, and under here we actually need to make this a variable. So let's go ahead and do that. Response, it's going to be our fetch right there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our response is okay. If it is, we're just going to console log await response.json. So now we can go into our home and then we can write await fetch data. And I'm going to go over what all of this is. So the first thing here that we have is an async function, which means that it returns a promise and allows us to use await inside. Then we have our try block in here, which makes the API call using the fetch function to our URL. And this try block actually console logs the errors if our URL is incorrect. And we also have our method, which is going to be get. And then under that, we have our if function. So if our fetch is okay, then we're going to be able to console log our response. Else, we can also console log something else. So let's just write else console log error. And don't forget at the very bottom in our function, in our home function, to add await fetch data. If you can see at the very bottom there, I forgot to actually record me adding it, so make sure that you do. And now we should be ready to move on to our route.js. And before we move on to the endpoint, make sure that you add the round brackets in here. We can see that I'm starting to get errors because I ran npm. That's because the route.js actually doesn't have anything in it. So let's start by making our function. So export async function, and it's going to be a get method. So make sure that this is capitalized. Now we're going to return a next response, which we do have to actually import. So there it is. So next response.json, and let's just start with saying that the message is just going to be hello world, since this is the first message or response that we're sending. And there it is. We can see that it's sent now, and that's all coming from here. So let's just actually change something else now and see what that would look like. So since we're in users, let's try and pass in a user. So let's make an object called user, and this would be something that you could fetch from a database. So const user, name is going to be let's just say Bob, and then age is just going to be 25. So it's just some random stuff. Now in here, we're going to pass in the user, and that's going to be our user. So we don't actually have to do all of that. But now if we save and reload, we can see that user is going to be Bob. And I actually have to go back to this page and hold Control F5 to fully reload the page, or else it might just give me the old answer. But if for some reason you're still getting hello world, what you can do is actually delete this next folder, because it could save in the cache here. So in the fetch cache, it could save it in here, and it's just not going to work. So you can just stop the server. So Control C, yes, press on enter, and then you can just delete this. So there it is. Now it's gone. But I'm just going to run this again. Go back in here. It's going to take some time, but there is going to be our Bob, and he's going to be 25. But now let's go over all of this code real quick. So the first line right here, we're importing our next response, which is actually a utility provided by Next.js for handling responses in API routes, which is exactly what we're doing. After that, we have our get function that handles the HTTP get request from here. So method get, and that's why this is also get. And then under that, we have our object user with a name of Bob, age of 25. And then at the very end, we're returning a JSON response, and we can see that all this stuff is working now. But now let's go over a post method. So we're going to change this to post, and then this guy's also going to change to post. So the difference between a post and a get method is a get method, we're getting something, but with a post method, we can actually add something in here. So let's just say that this was a login or something, and we could have, let's just say, gone an input or something, which we're going to do later. But here we can actually pass in a body with a JSON response. So JSON.stringify. And then since I don't want to have the same thing, name Bob and so on, let's just pass in a message of, let's just say, hello from page.js. And now if we go here, let's actually just remove this, and then let's just set the message here to be hello from, this is going to be route.js. And now we actually have to get this message from somewhere. So if we go in here, we can actually get a request and response. So let's make a variable called body. So const body, which is going to be our request.json. And we actually also have to await it. So await, or I didn't mean to press that. So await request.json. And then let's also console log the body and see what we get. So let's go in here. I'm gonna reload it, and now we're gonna have two messages, hello from page.js and hello from route.js. So we can see that both of them are working. But now that we know the very basics, let's go ahead and make a very basic application, or it's not really an application, but it's just an example of how we can use our API and our page.js files. So let's go ahead and delete all of that. So delete permanently, and we're going to start from scratch. So if I actually save this, so control save, we can see that this is still working for some reason. And if I reload all of this and save again, we can see that we're still getting this, and that's because of the cache that I was talking about. So we can actually just go ahead and delete this so that this doesn't happen. So make sure that you do that, accept it, and now it's all going to be gone. And make sure that you also stop the server and restart it so that everything is going to be fine. But now let's actually go ahead and make a very simple sign up page or a login page. So for that, let's just say that this was our sign up page. I'm not going to do too much. Let's delete everything. Now let's go ahead and make our sign up page. So we have to start by creating our function. So export default home, and here we're going to return our form. So let's go ahead and just make a very basic form with a class of container and then mx auto. Here we're going to have a few inputs. So input with an ID of name. Placeholder is going to be enter your name. Now let's add a few other ones. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it under. This is going to be password, and we're not going to add email because that's just going to be one extra input. So export default function, the goes away now. And we are going to need to use state here, but if we do try to use it, we're going to see that we'll have an error. So I'm going to go in here, we're going to have an error, and that's because we have to use something that's called use client. So if you write it at the very top, the error goes away. And so the reason that we need this use client is because Next.js defaults to server-side rendering for components inside of this app folder. But when we use this use client, then we're marking this component as client-side. So that allows us to use hooks, and that's why we need it. So there's going to be our hook there. Let's make our use state. So const, I'm just going to name this input, set input, and then that's just going to be use state. And here we're going to have the name, which is just going to be blank, and then also the password, which is going to be blank. And usually you would use something like bcrypt to hash it, but it doesn't really matter since we're just learning how to do this stuff. And I'm going to make a separate video on a full website, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But now what we want to do is add a function which is going to change all of that. So const handle change. Here we're going to get the event, and then we're going to set our input to be ... input, which is going to keep the other value that's not changing the same. And then we're going to select the value that's changed using the ID of the event. So e.target.id, and it's going to be e.target.value. And here we're going to write on change. We're going to pass in the event, and then we're going to write handle change with the event inside. And I'm going to actually copy all of this, paste it in here. And now we actually have to make a submit function. So let's go ahead and do that. So const handle submit. Here we're going to prevent default. And what we're going to do is we're going to fetch the data. So const response, that's going to be await fetch. Here we're going to go to API sign up, and we can actually use await here because, well, we're using client and that doesn't work together. But here we're going to have a post method. So method is going to be post. Let's fix that. So post, and then the body is going to be JSON.stringify input. So there we go. Now we're going to make our API folder with the signup folder, and then here we're going to add our route.js. Now here we're going to export our async function, which is going to be post. Here we're going to get our request, and let's start by getting our request. So that's going to be await request.json. And let's also import our next response. So there it is. And now we're going to return our next response with a message of, let's just say, success or something like that. So success, but let's also just console log it in the server to see if it works. So we have all of this stuff. Now we can go back in here. I'm going to reload, and let's just start by saying this is going to be name, this is going to be password, and press on submit. So pretty sure nothing happened, and that's because I forgot to actually add this in here. So on click, we're going to handle submit. So let's try again. It's going to be name, password, submit. And if we go back in here, go to our terminal, we're going to have the name and password, and we can see that all of that works. So we can try changing this to hello, and then world, submit, and now it's going to be hello world. Now after that's done, you would redirect the user to the home page or something else. But this is going to be my basic crash course on Next.js. I'm going to make a few other videos on databases and also networking, and I'm going to make a full application, so make sure that you stay tuned and subscribe so you don't miss those videos. But this is where I'm going to end this video, so I really hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, then make sure to leave a like, subscribe so that I don't miss those upcoming videos. Comment down below if you have any questions or if you have anything that you'd like to say, and hopefully see you in the next video.